Chosen one, your doubt has been getting louder for one reason, and it is not the reason you think. You have been waiting so long that you are beginning to mistake exhaustion for a sign that God said no. You are beginning to confuse the silence with an answer. You are beginning to wonder if the weight you feel in your chest is not just tiredness but truth. And that is the most dangerous moment in the life of someone called to something greater, not the moment they face an enemy, not the moment everything falls apart, but the quiet, suffocating moment when they start believing that maybe nothing was ever coming. Maybe it isn't coming. Maybe I missed it. Maybe God changed his mind. Maybe I believed for nothing. If any of those thoughts have visited you recently, if you've heard them in the early hours when the house is quiet and the world is asleep, then this message was not written for someone else. It was written for exactly where you are right now. But before you understand how close you may actually be, you need to hear something that doubt does not want you to consider. What if the moment you called "nothing is happening" is the moment you should have been watching most carefully? If messages like this help you hold on to your faith when doubt gets unbearably loud, take just a second to like this video and subscribe. This channel exists for moments exactly like this one, for the people who are still standing even when standing feels impossible. But before we go any deeper, because what you're about to hear is going to touch the exact part of you that still believes, but has grown exhausted from waiting, I need to say this. Maybe your biggest problem right now is not a lack of faith. Maybe you've been waiting so long that doubt has started to sound more like truth than truth itself. You survived the rejection. You survived the delays. You survived the closed doors and the nights where you lay in the dark, asking if God still remembered your name. But surviving is not the same as moving forward, and that is exactly why I created the total transformation of the Chosen One. 5 modules, a practical 30-day plan, 50 declarations, and 2 exclusive bonuses, all delivered as a PDF directly to your email within minutes. This is not another collection of beautiful words you hear today and forget by tomorrow. It is a structure designed to help you turn everything you have survived into clarity, discipline, direction, and real strength for the next season of your life. Because someone who has spent this long fighting fear, fighting waiting, fighting disappointment and doubt, you don't only need more motivation. You need to know how not to return to the same version of yourself when this video ends. That is what this material was built to help you do. You can find access in the first pinned comment below. And if something inside you already knows that it is time to stop only waiting for change and start preparing yourself for it, don't let the same doubt that has already delayed so many of your decisions delay one more. Now let's talk about what has actually been happening to you. There is a kind of tiredness that nobody sees. It doesn't show up on your face when you're around people. It doesn't make it into your conversations. You carry it quietly, carefully, the way someone carries something fragile across a room full of people who don't know they're holding anything at all. You go through the days, you smile when you need to, you say the right things, you check the same account and tell yourself it's going to be okay. You look at the same inbox, the same phone, waiting for something, a call, an opportunity, a shift, a word, anything that tells you that the story is still moving. And most nights you go to sleep believing. You close your eyes with a small fire still lit. And then morning comes and you wake up and the doubt is already there, sitting on the edge of the bed before you even stand up, ready to remind you of everything that hasn't changed yet. You've watched people around you announce things, engagements, new jobs, new homes, healings, promotions, opportunities that appeared out of nowhere for someone else. And you said the right thing. You said you were happy for them, because you were. You are not a bitter person. But somewhere underneath the happiness you expressed, there was a question you couldn't say out loud. God, when is it my turn? And you felt guilty for even thinking it, like wanting your moment meant you didn't trust enough, like the question itself was proof of something broken in your faith. So you buried it. You kept being strong for everyone else. You kept showing up for other people's breakthrough while carrying your own unanswered prayers in private. You cried only when nobody was watching. And somewhere along the way, you started to protect yourself by lowering your expectations. Not because you stopped believing, but because it hurts less when you don't let yourself get too excited. Disappointment at a low altitude doesn't feel like falling. That is what this season has done to you, not because you are weak, not because your faith is broken, but because you have been asked to believe for a long time without receiving enough visible evidence to quiet the questions in your mind. The doubt didn't appear because something is wrong with you. It appeared because belief under prolonged silence without confirmation is one of the hardest things a human being can do. You did not stop loving God. You became tired of constantly preparing your heart for an answer that seemed to keep moving just slightly out of reach. And that exhaustion, the kind that settles into your bones after months or years of waiting, that is exactly what doubt has been using against you. Because doubt doesn't attack you when things are going well. It waits. It is patient in a way that faith is sometimes asked to be. It waits for the silence to stretch long enough. It waits for the disappointment to stack high enough, and then it speaks. And it doesn't speak loudly. It whispers, in your own voice, things that feel like wisdom but are actually fear dressed as logic. Nothing changed. You missed your moment. You waited for nothing. Other people are chosen, not you. You are too late. God forgot you. Stop expecting more. You should have known better. You were never going to be the one. And the cruelest part is that none of those things feel like doubt. They feel like honesty. They feel like you finally being realistic after spending too long being naive. That is the sophistication of doubt. It doesn't come in wearing a villain's costume. It comes in wearing the face of reason. It says, look at the evidence. Look at how long you've been waiting. Look at what hasn't changed. And then it offers you a conclusion. Absence of visible results means absence of divine movement. But here is what doubt has been doing that you need to recognize clearly. Doubt has been using what you cannot see as proof that nothing exists. It has been pointing to the surface of the water and telling you nothing is underneath, because you can't see underneath from where you're standing. It has been holding up silence as if silence were a verdict, as if God's quietness were God's answer. As if the gap between your prayer and your breakthrough were empty space rather than preparation. Absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence, and the problem has never been that you feel doubt. The problem begins the moment doubt is given permission to interpret your entire story. Because doubt is not a narrator, it is a reaction. And reactions should not be confused with revelations. Doubt can speak, it just doesn't get to make the decision. Now, the delay. Let's talk about it honestly, without the kind of oversimplification that sounds good but doesn't hold up when you're the one who's been waiting. Because you've heard versions of this before. You've heard that God was protecting you, that the delay was a blessing. And sometimes that framing arrives too quickly, too cleanly, as if it's supposed to close a wound before it's had time to be seen. So let's not start there. Let's start with a question instead. Who has this waiting forced you to become? Think about it. Think about who you were when this season started. Think about what you accepted then that you would never accept now. Think about the relationships you stayed in too long because you didn't believe you deserved better. Think about the approval you chased from people who were never going to give it. Think about the rooms you kept entering hoping someone would finally recognize your value. Think about the boundaries you didn't have, the needs you didn't name, the voice you swallowed to avoid conflict. The waiting changed those things. Not immediately, not without pain, but it changed them. You learned to recognize who only showed up when they needed something from you. You learned what manipulation feels like before it finishes its sentence. You learned that not every door that opens deserves to be walked through. You learned that some opportunities would have required you to betray something essential in yourself to access them. You started to understand that attention and love are not the same currency. You discovered that dinero without peace doesn't solve the deep things. You began to see that some of the relationships you mourned leaving would have slowly reduced you into someone you wouldn't recognize. None of that learning arrived as a gift. It arrived as loss, as pain, as closed doors and silence and nights that went too long. But look at what it built. Look at what you can see now that you were blind to before. Look at the discernment that sits in you today that was not there when this season started. Maybe God was not only preparing the miracle for you, maybe He has also been preparing you for what you once asked Him to place in your hands. Not as a comfort, not as a theological explanation for your pain, but as a real and observable truth. You are not the same person who started praying this prayer, and that matters more than the waiting wants you to believe. Now here is something that might shift the way you've been watching for the answer. What if the first evidence is much quieter than you expected? What if the breakthrough doesn't announce itself the way you imagined it would? What if it doesn't arrive with a dramatic moment? A sudden and unmistakable sign, something that leaves no room for doubt. What if it begins as a conversation you didn't plan to have? An unexpected invitation from someone you almost didn't respond to? A new idea arriving in the middle of an ordinary afternoon? A decision you finally have the courage to make, not because everything is clear, but because you are finally willing to move. Someone finally revealing who they actually are before you went any deeper. A professional door opening that requires you to show up differently than you have before. A different response from someone who has never responded that way. A financial possibility you would have dismissed 6 months ago as too complicated or too risky. The courage to say no to something that would have once seemed impossible to refuse. The courage to say yes to something that fear has kept you from touching, or something even smaller than all of that. Peace arriving before the circumstances change. That might be the first evidence, not a transformation of everything around you, but something shifting so fundamentally inside you that you realize you cannot go back to how you experienced this before. Because the first evidence of your miracle may not be that everything around you changes. It may be that something inside you becomes impossible to return to. And if that has already started, if there are things you've stopped tolerating, ways you've stopped shrinking, people you've stopped chasing, then pay attention. That is not nothing. That is not a coincidence. That is the interior architecture of a life being rebuilt before the exterior catches up. Let's talk about the financial weight, because for many of you, the waiting isn't only spiritual. It has a number attached to it. It has a due date. It has a balance that doesn't move the way you need it to. And there is a particular exhaustion that comes from living in survival mode for too long, where every month is about making it to the next month, where every decision is filtered through scarcity, where you've grown so used to the tension of not enough that you've almost forgotten what it feels like to breathe without that pressure sitting on your chest. You are not lazy. You are not being punished. You have worked. You have tried. You have prayed over finances that didn't respond the way you needed. The bills don't pause while you're growing. The pressure doesn't lower itself while God is working. You have to keep showing up to a situation that hasn't changed yet without letting the weight of it convince you that this is permanent. The miracle in this area may not arrive as a sudden flood. Sometimes it arrives as an opportunity you finally have the eyes to recognize, a connection that opens a door you didn't know existed, a decision that stops the bleeding, a discipline that begins to compound quietly over time, stopping a pattern of self-sabotage that has been undoing what you've been building, becoming the kind of person who can hold and steward what arrives, instead of someone who receives and loses because the foundation wasn't ready. The financial miracle is also a process. It may begin not with a dramatic deposit, but with a decision, a shift in strategy, a door you finally walk through instead of standing outside waiting for it to widen. Watch for those movements. Don't dismiss the smaller evidence because you were expecting something dramatic. Provision has many shapes. Wisdom is one of them. Now let's go somewhere harder to talk about than money. Relationships, the ones that broke you, the ones that left without warning, where love was used as leverage, where affection was conditional and withdrawal was the punishment for having needs, where you worked so hard to hold something together that finally fell apart anyway. And part of you still wonders what you could have done differently, even though you already know you couldn't have saved what was never built to last. Some of you are carrying wounds from people who will never apologize, people who chose someone else, something else over you. And the silence from those people, the absence of the explanation you deserved, that silence has made trust feel like a risk you're not sure you can afford again. You've been careful since then. That carefulness has protected you, but it has also sometimes kept out things trying to reach you with something healthier, something more honest, something that didn't require you to be less than yourself to earn a place in it. Sometimes the miracle is not that someone comes back. Sometimes the miracle is that you finally stop needing the person who kept breaking you. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive as a reunion. It arrives as the morning you wake up and realize the absence no longer controls your day. The morning the thought of them doesn't take your breath. And sometimes healing is learning to recognize a love that does not require suffering to prove it is real. A presence that doesn't make you second-guess your worth, where being honest doesn't feel like walking on glass. That is worth waiting for, not as a fantasy, as a standard. Now, the fear that you've run out of time, the feeling that while you were waiting, surviving, rebuilding, everyone else moved forward and you got left behind on a timeline that no longer makes sense. You are not disqualified because your timeline embarrassed you. The comparison has been lying to you, showing you other people's visible progress and asking you to measure your hidden development against it. A trajectory that looks delayed by human timekeeping does not mean a trajectory abandoned by divine intent. Some of the most significant arrivals in history looked late from the outside. They looked like they missed the moment. And then something happened that could only happen at that exact point, because the person had finally been shaped to hold it without destroying it. You are not too late. The years you feel like you lost are not a sentence. They are a curriculum. Let's talk about the anxiety. The kind that lives in the decision-making, that turns every choice into a potential catastrophe before you've even made it. Should I go or stay? What if I choose wrong and lose everything I've managed to hold on to? The mind that has been through enough disappointment doesn't just fear the next failure, it anticipates it. It runs simulations of everything that could go wrong before you've taken a single step. And so you analyze, and then you analyze the analysis. And the decision that needed to be made last week is still sitting in the same place, surrounded by so many layers of overthinking that you can no longer feel what you actually wanted before the fear got involved. You do not need to control every variable to take the next step. Clarity does not always arrive as a loud voice. Sometimes clarity begins when urgency finally stops screaming, long enough for you to hear what has been true all along. Peace is refusing to allow every unresolved thing to drive. You can have fear and still decide. You can have doubt and still choose not to give it the wheel. Now let's talk about who you actually are. Not who the waiting has convinced you that you've become. Who you are, demonstrated not by the absence of struggle, but by the fact that you are still here. Being chosen does not mean being superior to anyone. It means you were entrusted with a path that could only be walked by someone willing to carry what this path requires. Endurance without immediate reward, faith without consistent validation. Chosen one. Your greatest evidence was never that life became easy. It was that everything that should have destroyed your faith failed to completely take it from you. Everything that should have ended your believing. The betrayals, the silences, the losses, the moments where the ground gave way beneath you. And yet here you are, still watching, still refusing, even in your most exhausted state, to let go entirely. That is not weakness. That is the evidence. That is the proof that what is in you was placed there by something stronger than your circumstances have been. Faith is not performing confidence you don't feel. Faith is the decision, made quietly, sometimes painfully, always intentionally, to refuse to give doubt final authority over your story, to acknowledge that the silence is real, that the weight is real, that the exhaustion is real, and still say, doubt can speak. It just doesn't get to make the decision. That is the line, not when the miracle arrives, but when you draw it internally and stop letting the most afraid part of your thinking author your future. Here is what doubt has been working hard to keep you from seeing. You have already been changing, not in the ways that are easy to announce, but in the quiet daily ways that actually constitute transformation. You no longer chase certain people the way you once did. Things that used to pull you completely off center no longer have that access. You want peace more than attention. You have become more selective about where you place your energy, who receives your time, what you're willing to tolerate. Certain conversations exhaust you now that you could once sit in indefinitely. You no longer want to explain your worth to people who have already decided not to see it. You are still waiting for the external change, but the internal transformation has already begun. That is the ground being prepared. That is the infrastructure being laid before the visible structure rises. Do not look at your life and see only what hasn't arrived yet. Look also at who you have stopped being, because that departure was necessary, and it happened because of what this season required of you. Your miracle is closer than your doubt wants you to believe. You are closer because you are no longer who you were when this prayer first left your mouth. You are closer because your discernment sharpened and you now recognize things that would have walked right past you before. You are closer because the desperation that once made you available to anything has been slowly becoming the discernment that makes you available only to what actually belongs. You have survived seasons designed to make you quit. You have learned things only this specific path could have taught you. You have released people and patterns that needed to go before the next chapter could open. You have become capable of holding what you once asked for. Not theoretically, but actually. The version of you that started this wait was not yet ready for what the wait was preparing you to receive. This version is closer to ready than you know. And giving up now would mean judging your entire journey from its most emotionally exhausted moment. Tired is real, tired is valid, but tired should never be the author. Before the final words, 2 things quickly. If this message is reaching something in you that needed to be reached, leave a comment and like this video. It helps this reach someone else fighting the same battle in silence. And one final reminder, the total transformation of the chosen one is in the first pinned comment. Because this is the moment most people feel something shift, and then let it pass. The video ends, the old patterns return, and nothing changes. That material was built to prevent exactly that. To give you structure, clarity, and real direction for your next season, instead of surviving it the same way you survived the last one. If something in you knows it is time, don't let doubt convince you to postpone one more decision. Now let's finish this. You came into this video carrying something. Underneath the faith you were still holding on to, there was a thought, maybe several. They sounded like this: God forgot me. Nothing changed. I waited for nothing. I'm too late. Doubt was not proof of abandonment. It was proof of a long wait. Waiting was not proof of rejection. It was proof that what is coming requires the version of you that patience has been building. Pain was not proof that your story ended. Silence was never permission to bury your hope. Silence is where some of the most important things are built, underground, invisible, and real. You do not need to know the exact date. You do not need to feel confident every morning. You need only to refuse, clearly, deliberately, with everything still in you, to let your most exhausted thought become the author of your future. If that is the decision you are making today, write it in the comments. My faith is louder than my doubt. Not because typing words controls heaven, but because sometimes your own eyes need to see the decision your heart is making. Because sometimes declaring it, even shakily, even in the middle of a battle that isn't over, is the moment the shift begins. Chosen one, you do not need to know exactly how close the miracle is to refuse to let doubt convince you that it is impossible. Keep walking. Keep becoming. Keep showing up for the person this season has been building, even when that person can't yet see the full picture of what they're becoming. God has not finished with you. The silence is not the end of the story. The delay is not the verdict. The exhaustion is not evidence of abandonment. You are still here, and that means the story is still being written. There is another video on your screen right now, made for the same person who made it all the way through this one. The one still fighting, still believing, still refusing to stop completely. Watch it, because what you are walking through deserves more than one conversation. God has not forgotten your name. Go.